All right, let's get right to that breaking news. It comes from the Justice Department. MS now confirming reports that former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted for the second time. Joining us, MS Now senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig, and MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and MS Now political analyst Eugene Robinson. Carol, what do we understand this indictment to be about?
We are told by a very good source that this indictment relates to an investigation into the allegations that former FBI Director James Comey had made threats against the president's life when he posted something on Instagram, which was a picture of some shells arranged in a certain way, which he took to be a political message. He captioned it, oh, interesting message here. It said 8647. He was interviewed about this by FBI agents as he drove back from a beach trip, and this investigation went on, and now we understand a grand jury has returned an indictment for him making this threat against the life of the president.
Legally sound footing? Lisa?
It's hard to say because the Supreme Court has upheld a statute that penalizes making threats against a president. People said, for example, in the 1960s that this was an infringement on First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court said, no, the statute is constitutional, but it has to be a true threat. And by that, what some people have interpreted that to mean is that a reasonable person looking at all of the evidence would themselves understand it as a threat. Political hyperbole, said the Supreme Court, is not a threat. Something made in jest is not a threat. So I think there is somewhat of an uphill climb here for the Department of Justice in establishing that Jim Comey actually meant this as a threat against the life of the president, as opposed to a statement about getting rid of him from office or having the country be rid of him as a political scourge, not as a threat against his life, Katie.
8647 arranged with shells on a beach and posted to Instagram. Do you see that, Eugene, as a threat against the president's life?
Well, you know, Katie, I think I'm a reasonable person, according to the Supreme Court standard. And no, my understanding of what 86 means is to kick someone out. And in the context of talking about a president, in this political context, it means you kick him out of office. And that's a perfectly normal thing to say if you were a political opponent of President Trump, and certainly would be protected speech. So, Lisa is the expert on how the Supreme Court might slice this very thin slice of potato, but I think it's a stretch. I mean, it seems obvious to me that they were looking for something to charge Comey with, or something else to charge Comey with, having failed the first time around, and they think this is it.
Yeah, and just a note for everybody, James Comey says he saw these shells arranged in this way on the beach and took a picture of it, that he himself did not arrange these shells. But Carol, remind us what this led to. Wasn't he on vacation at the time? Was it the FBI? Yeah. Or was it Secret Service? Did they follow him home on his drive back to, where was it, Virginia or Maryland?
He lives in Virginia. He was, followed in a car. As Secret Service Protective Intelligence Division interviewed him, but the FBI also has raised questions about this. Protective Intelligence Division, just so you know, tries to assess threats, whether they're made in a bar or on social media or outside the gates of the White House, and they interview people that they fear are threatening the president's life. This was viewed at the time, to Gene's point, as a little bit of overkill, because James Comey could have written on social media, I hope we don't reelect this president, or I hope he leaves office soon. And that would not be a threat of violence. 8647 in shells involves some slang. And I will remark that when Comey was asked about this, he took down the post and said he took it to be, and he interpreted it to be, a political statement of, let's not have this guy as president anymore. I'm paraphrasing, but he took it as a political statement and took it down saying, I don't mean any violence. I don't intend any violence. And that's why I'm removing it. So that was fairly quickly after being questioned.
Lisa?
I want to give some context about that Supreme Court case that I was talking about. In 1966, an African-American war protester, Robert Watts, had attended an anti-war rally. And at the rally, he said, having received his draft card, "If they ever make me carry a rifle, the first man I want to get in my sights is LBJ. They are not going to make me kill my black brothers." He was overheard saying that by someone from the Army Intelligence Corps, and that led to his arrest. When the Supreme Court then, Katie, ruled on whether or not he could be convicted for making a threat against the president, what they said was, what is a threat must be distinguished from what is constitutionally protected speech. The language of the political arena is often vituperative, abusive, and inexact. Again, based on that Supreme Court standard, I think the Department of Justice here has somewhat of an uphill battle in demonstrating that Jim Comey intended for a constellation of shells he happened upon to be a threat against the life of this president.
Eugene mentioned something a moment ago. They had tried to indict him before that case was thrown out. Remind us again, Carol, what happened?
I'm so sorry. I'm getting something on my phone. Can you ask me again, Katie, the question?
The Justice Department tried to indict James Comey before it was thrown out. Remind us what happened.
So many problems with that case. First off, the appointment of the prosecutor in that case. You may remember that Lindsay Halligan was installed as the acting U.S. attorney by President Trump after he threatened to fire and ultimately drove out the other acting U.S. attorney he had chosen, Eric Siebert, in the Eastern District of Virginia. The removal or the forced departure of Mr. Siebert happened because he reported to his higher-ups that he did not believe the evidence warranted seeking a grand jury case against Comey for lying to Congress. He did not believe the case stood up. He wasn't the only one in the Department of Justice. I have talked to political appointees in the Department of Justice who believed the evidence just did not warrant anything along the lines of claiming that James Comey misled or misstated or lied intentionally to Congress about whether or not he had leaked things about the Russian interference probe. He said he stood by his previous testimony, and that is basically what he said. He was misquoted in the indictment, but Lindsay Halligan pursued it within days. I think it was 4 days after she got into that job. That indictment was dismissed by the chief judge and upheld by an appeals court because Lindsay Halligan was not legally appointed to that job.
Eugene, again, let's just talk about the moment we're in. This is a Department of Justice that has made it clear through the actions and the indictments and the investigations that anybody who the president has gone up against politically or doesn't like or feels, if he feels they've been unfair to him, that they're in the line of sights. And I don't mean that violently. I mean just they're going to be investigated. And that goes for people at DOJ who worked on investigations, who were assigned them, being fired from DOJ or the FBI. It goes to political opponents. It goes to the former FBI director. What is the priority from your position, as you see it, of this Justice Department?
I am your retribution. I mean, retribution is something that apparently President Trump was absolutely serious about when he said during the campaign, I am your retribution. I guess he meant I am my retribution, because he is determined, obviously now, to get back at anybody who he thinks wronged him. And this is like a constant undercurrent now, and this is an engine that churns along regardless of whatever else is happening in the world or in the nation. So yes, we're at war with Iran. Yes, King Charles is here. Yes, this. Yes, that. Economy, but retribution just kind of keeps moving ahead, and clearly, it runs into a brick wall, and it tries to find some way around it. It looks for another opening, and Comey is one of his main targets, and I think he's just going to keep coming at Comey.
All right, Eugene Daniels, thank you very much.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. Breaking news this afternoon from the Department of Justice in its efforts to satisfy Donald Trump's insatiable appetite for political retribution. After previously trying and failing to target former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, the DOJ has secured a new indictment against one of Donald Trump's most prominent perceived enemies. We do not yet know the full details of the charges against Comey, and we are waiting on a press conference from the Department of Justice scheduled for this hour. But here's what we do know. The indictment has to do with this post the former FBI director made on his Instagram account almost a year ago. Shells on a beach, spelling out 8647 with the caption, "Cool shell formation on my beach walk." The Trump administration has claimed that that post was a call for violence against Donald Trump because of the slang term 86 that usually means to get rid of something. Immediately after the post, the Secret Service had Jim Comey and his wife Patrice followed by law enforcement from their vacation home in North Carolina all the way up the eastern seaboard to their home in the Washington, D.C. area before Jim Comey voluntarily sat for an interview, and the Justice Department dropped the matter at that time. The former director of the FBI came on this program last year and explained that he thought the seashells that he says were put there by someone else were nothing more than clever political speech, but that he immediately deleted that post when people thought that he was somehow calling for violence. Watch what he told us then. So your position, even after all of this, the Secret Service calling you and bringing you in for questioning, is that the phrase, the message on the shells was political speech and is political speech?
Yeah, by somebody. I actually didn't think of it as political speech by me, but I thought, what a clever way to express a political view. The shells were the same color for each of the letters, so different colors for the letters. It took a lot of work. Somebody with artistic flair did that, and I have a hard time believing it was anybody with a dark intention, and it certainly was no dark intention on my part, on my spouse's part.
So what we have today, this revived attempt to target Jim Comey by, we should keep in mind, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, is coming at an important time for acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. It comes weeks after Pam Bondi was fired, in some part, perhaps large part, for her failures in carrying out Donald Trump's retribution agenda. But it's not clear what new evidence, if any, exists or that Blanche has uncovered to make this case successful now. Today's news of Comey's indictment does, though, feel like a quintessential Trump news cycle. One crisis wiped off the front page by another crisis. But this breaking news is part of the very same slow-motion collision that we've been covering for a decade now between Trump and those who dare to use their First Amendment right to criticize him. Donald Trump is locked in a cycle right now of political collapse, held up by political retribution, and behind it all is a near-obsessive whole-of-government campaign designed to stifle and punish speech that Trump does not like. Make no mistake, Jim Comey is being punished today for speaking out 8 years ago about Trump's efforts to politicize the FBI while he was president the first time. Jimmy Kimmel is being attacked today for telegraphing Donald Trump's frailties. Tish James spoke through her legal filings the truth about Trump.org being a fraud, so Trump sought to prosecute her. Law firms were attacked for standing with Donald Trump's political opponents, so Trump punished them. Universities have been attacked for creating safe spaces for criticizing administration priorities, so they too have been brought to heel. Artists have been purged from the Kennedy Center and replaced with cronies. Winners and losers have been picked in big media based on their political alliances. The list goes on and on and on. And every day they want us to think it's a new story, but it is the same story. It is the oldest Trump story. And at its core, and interestingly, perhaps the reason Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly are getting off the Trump train and stepping away from Donald Trump is because the truth of it is that Donald Trump is waging an all-out war on the First Amendment and on free speech. That is where we begin today. Former Assistant Special Agent in charge at the FBI and National Security and Intelligence Analyst Michael Feinberg is back with us. Also joining us, the former director of the CIA and our senior national security and intelligence analyst, John Brennan's here. Also joining us, senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig. Let me start with you, Director Brennan, because the reality is there is a similar zeal to punish you for doing more than exercising your First Amendment rights, for doing your job as the then director of the CIA. What is it like to sort of watch this news come across it's not a wire anymore, but come across our devices?
Well, Nicole, an overused term is appalling. I find it appalling. Jim Comey served as a U.S. attorney and the Deputy Attorney General for President George W. Bush. He served as the Director of FBI for President Barack Obama. It is absurd to think that Jim Comey would be advocating violence against anyone, much less a president of the United States. I served with Jim Comey during the last years of the Obama administration. He is somebody who I think served his country with integrity, with professionalism, and with determination to make sure that the rule of law was going to be followed. And so, as you pointed out, I think there has been a litany of these efforts over the past number of years, past year and a half, by Donald Trump to, exact revenge against some of his perceived political adversaries. So I feel very, very dismayed that Jim Comey is going through this and has to go through more of it. I am in that crowd of folks who has been targeted by Donald Trump. And it just shows just how much, the Department of Justice has fallen. I was listening earlier today to the remarks of Queen Elizabeth when she addressed the joint session of Congress back in the 1950s. And one of her lines was that we should never take the ideals of democracy for granted. And the rule of law and the use of the justice system is one of those real institutions and hallmarks of democratic principles. And it's so unfortunate that, over the course of so many years, and I guess we were taking that rule of law and the Department of Justice's efforts for granted. But obviously we cannot now. And it's so unfortunate that individuals like Todd Blanche, who had a very, respectable reputation before joining ranks with Donald Trump, is willing to appease Donald Trump by doing these things against individuals who serve their country, I think, admirably and with noble distinction.
I want to be clear, we are not here because Matt Gaetz has been indicted, but Matt Gaetz in February of 2024 posted this with the term 86, quote, "We've now 86'd McCarthy, McDaniel, McConnell. Better days are ahead." Carol Leonnig, you do, I understand, have the indictment. Tell us what you're learning.
Yeah, it was just filed moments ago, Nicole, and forgive me for looking down at my phone during some of this. Comey is charged with 2 federal counts of crimes, and they are first making specific threats against the president and his successors, and then also making threats across interstate commerce. And I just want to say that this is filed, as we wrote a few hours ago, in the Eastern District of New York, which had an open investigation basically hours after Jim Comey posted this picture on or around May 15th, 2025, on his Instagram page. As you know, Nicole, he pretty quickly withdrew and took down this picture, wanting to make clear to people that he thought it might be political speech by someone, pretty clever political speech, but he did not want anyone to infer that he had any malevolent or violent intention or was trying to incite any violence. He was interviewed by the Secret Service as after he drove home from his vacation in North Carolina back to his home in Virginia. The Protective Intelligence Division, which chases down anybody who is making threats online about the president, often goes out to places after a threat's made in a bar, after a threat's made online, after a threat is made at the gates of the White House, interviews those individuals, and that's what they did with Jim Comey. And these are the charges that are resulting today out of the Eastern District of North Carolina.
The first time you said Eastern District of New York, I just want to make sure that you've got what I've got in front of you, the Eastern District of North Carolina, right? Yes. I'm uncomfortable to even read this, but this is an indictment, so I will. Michael Feinberg, count one, on or about May 15th, 2025, in the Eastern District of North Carolina, the defendant, Jim Comey, did knowingly and willfully make a threat to take the life of and inflict bodily harm upon the President of the United States, in that he publicly posted a photograph on the internet social media site Instagram, which depicted seashells arranged in a pattern making out 8647, in which a reasonable recipient who's familiar with the circumstances would interpret as a serious expression of an intent to do harm to the President of the United States. I mean, again, Matt Gaetz posted, we've 86'd McCarthy, McDaniel, McConnell, better days are ahead. Is there any reasonable interpretation that Matt Gaetz meant we'd killed them? I mean, is this in law enforcement an accepted phrase that is associated with threats of death?
No, I actually first learned the phrase when I was working the door at a bar in Chicago shortly after I graduated college, where we would use it to refer to ejecting unruly customers. So when I saw Jim Comey's post on Instagram from last year, I simply assumed it was a reference to removing the president from office. It is a very large leap to claim that that is a threat of violence. And because of that, I don't want the phrasing I'm about to use to make light of how malevolent and destructive of constitutional norms this Justice Department is being with this indictment. But this is the single dumbest charging decision I have ever seen in my entire law enforcement career or in my even longer career as an attorney.
Donald Trump's Justice Department indicting former FBI Director James Comey. And not for the first time. This is the second case against Comey after the first attempt collapsed, putting one of Trump's most prominent perceived political enemies firmly back into the spotlight. The New York Times calling it, quote, another twist in the department's tortured efforts to satisfy the demands of Mr. Trump to target Comey, a longtime foe of the president. This charge is over a social media post made nearly 1 year ago of a photograph of seashells arranged to say 8647. 86 is often slang used in places like restaurants for to remove. And Trump is, of course, the 47th president. The DOJ is claiming Comey did, quote, knowingly and willfully make a threat to take the life of and to inflict bodily harm upon Trump by posting that image, citing a statute that criminalizes threats to the president. The indictment comes as acting AG Todd Blanche, currently helming the DOJ, has been making splashy moves to permanently get that top job. Blanche answering questions about free speech versus true threats.
For critics who say, where does free speech end and an actual threat of violence begin?
I don't know what critics say that, especially today, but it's not a very difficult line to look at, and it's not, in my mind, a difficult line for one to cross over one way or the other. And so whether there is a defense, as you just described, maybe.
Comey and his wife were tracked by Secret Service following the seashell post last year, a step that's usually reserved for serious threats. And Comey sat for an interview, but DOJ took no further action until now. Comey responding to the indictment in a brief video this afternoon.
Nothing has changed with me. I'm still innocent. I'm still not afraid. And I still believe in the independent federal judiciary, so let's go.
And he spoke out on the actual post last year, saying he never intended for violence.
And we stood over it, and I said, I think it's some kind of like political message. And she said, 86, when I was a server, she did a lot of work in restaurants, meant to remove an item from the menu when you ran out of ingredients. And I said, well, to me, as a kid, it always meant to leave a place, to ditch a place. I said, that's really clever. So then she said, you should take a picture of that. And I did. And I posted it on my Instagram account and thought nothing more of it until I heard through her that people were saying it was some sort of a call for assassination, which is crazy. But I took it down. Even if I think it's crazy, I don't want to be associated with violence of any kind.
And joining me now to examine all of this is James Sample, constitutional law professor at Hofstra University, and Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and MS Now legal contributor. It is great to have both of you. Joyce, so let's start with a question that Blanche essentially dodged at the presser earlier today, which is the crucial question here, how prosecutors are going to try to prove intent in this case. Comey, you hear him describe there, he immediately took this post down, very clearly stated that he had no violent intentions here. So how are prosecutors going to prove otherwise?
I think you've gone straight to the heart of the problem with the government's case here, which is that they will have to convince not just one person, not just a grand jury that hears only one side of the story, but a unanimous jury in a trial courtroom with a judge presiding that Jim Comey intended to kill or physically harm the president when he posted on Instagram. That feels like an insurmountable hurdle to me. The standard federal prosecutors use that we talk about all the time, Antonia, is the one that's found in the Justice Manual that says you shouldn't indict a case unless you really firmly believe you have sufficient evidence to convict and to have that conviction affirmed on appeal. The government does not have that there, and it was an unreasonable exercise of prosecutorial discretion to take this case to the grand jury.
So, James, if this is unreasonable, if there is an insurmountable hurdle here, what's the real point of this?
The real point is harassment. The real point is retribution. The point here is that we have two tracks at this point in our system of justice. And just in the last 3 weeks, we've had that encapsulated. 2 weeks ago, this same Department of Justice, led by this same acting attorney general, sought to vacate the convictions of the worst of the worst related to January 6th. The Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the seditious conspiracy charges. Those are the individuals who weren't covered by the full pardon given to the 1,500 plus individuals otherwise responsible for January 6th. Last week, we saw this same Department of Justice go after the Southern Poverty Law Center for infiltrating hate groups. And today, they decide to go after Jim Comey again, this time for a social media post. The message here is that Todd Blanche has an audience of one, and that is Donald Trump. It's not the rule of law. It's not what Joyce is referencing as the true and historic standards of the Department of Justice.
Joyce, what do you imagine? I mean, we heard Kash Patel at that same presser claim that there have been 9-10 months or so of investigation here. At one point, Blanche described the normal process to bring forward witnesses. I mean, implying that they're going to have an argument to make here around intent. And I guess I'm giving any shred of benefit of a doubt here. To the best of your ability, what can you imagine or your best informed guess? What does it look like as to what the federal government could have gathered here after trailing Comey with the Secret Service and allegedly investigating this over the course of the last year, which means there's overlap here between this case and the one that was previously tossed out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think James has the correct answer about this. This is not about convicting James Comey in a courtroom. This is about intimidating and harassing him. And of course, it's not lost on any of us, that Todd Blanche is currently the acting attorney general of the United States. He's auditioning for the top job. He wants to be the guy who gets to run the president's law firm, which is now seated on Pennsylvania Avenue in the Kennedy building, where so many other people have served the American people. And it's really deeply disturbing. Unless the government has somehow acquired a smoking gun, Jim Comey writing in his diary or telling 3 reliable sources that when he posted that on Instagram, he wanted to see the president of the United States killed, the government didn't do any investigation in the last 10 months. And look, if they had a smoking gun like that, we would know about it because this Justice Department leaks, and they would have been singing that from the top of the mountains.
The other problem here to me, it seems, is that this whole thing is built on the assumption that we all agree that 86 means to murder, to kill someone. If you have any friends who've ever worked in the restaurant business, it kind of means to get rid of, to toss out food, to not put an ingredient in somebody's order. It doesn't mean you are murdering the food. And so I guess to what extent does the technical definition, the sort of publicly held standard of an understanding of a term apply in this case, Joyce?
Yeah, this is why the government will be unable to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Comey had the necessary intent. You know, I spent 4 years waiting tables. I know what 86 means. It means you're out of something and the chef has taken it off of the menu. Well, maybe other people use it in a more violent sense, but the jury will have to be persuaded that Comey didn't mean it in the more innocent application and that he intended to do violence. And that's completely out of keeping with Jim Comey's character. Anybody who worked with him when he was at either the FBI or the Justice Department is aware of his reputation and his effort to do the right thing, certainly not someone who ever called for violence. And so this is the kind of case where the defense will have character witness after character witness, and it doesn't really look like the government has anything to counter that.
James, I know you have something to say on this, too.
Well, Joyce said everything Joyce said is absolutely spot on. But let's get really legal here and technical just for a moment. The legal question here, the threshold legal question is 8647 a true threat? Now, that is a term of art in the meaning of First Amendment law. True threats are not protected speech. So that's an important question. And true threats against the president, there are statutes, and the statutes under which he was charged here are those statutes. That is a serious felony. The constitutional standard, though, for true threats in this context comes from a 2023 case. That's the most recent application of the true threat standard. And that case is called Counterman v. Colorado. Unless people think we're just talking about politics here, that decision was 7-2. Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Alito, and Justice Kavanaugh are in the majority. And as Joyce just noted, there is an objective component and a subjective component. And in order to prove their case, they're going to need to prove that this was objectively a true threat and subjectively that Jim Comey was at least recklessly disregarding of the idea that it could be perceived as a true threat. The idea that if this were ever to go to trial, which is its own threshold question, whether that ever happens, that, as Joyce said, they could get 12 jurors to unanimously convict on both elements of that is crazy. This is not a serious prosecution. It is a serious use of the Department of Justice for mispurposes.
And to be clear, statutes also prohibit the government from going after someone a second time just because their first attempt failed, right? That is...
Vindictive prosecution is a serious matter. I think there's a greater case here for vindictive prosecution than there is for the underlying offense.
Today's new indictment comes after the DOJ failed to prosecute Comey last year. A judge dismissed that case, finding the department unlawfully appointed the Trump hack hired to bring charges against Comey. And here we are again.
You know, I think the timing around James Comey's indictment again today, this retribution machine, is very interesting. We're asking a lot of key questions about what happened this past weekend, the security failures, the White House just asking us to move on with their narrative. Carol Leonnig actually got us some answers today about what happened on Saturday, what was really going down. We're going to talk to Carol Leonnig in a little bit. We're going to ask about James Comey, but we're not going to get off the other story. The administration owes us some answers. And this is just... Look, I don't have any love lost for James. Look, I'm on the side of Martha Stewart and Hillary Clinton when it comes to James Comey, but regardless if you like him or not, this is unacceptable. It's not just about James Comey, it's about all of us.
So we're not going to undo that past, and I agree with you on that front. You know, that a lot of questions there, but this present says a lot about where this administration wants to take us as a country, where without any basis for legal facts and evidence to go after someone like James Comey should tell us all about where we are. I'm really interested in talking to Carol. I really don't give a damn about this piece of it because James going to be okay. Because when this gets in front of a judge, if it ever gets in front of a judge or jury, it will be summarily, I think, thrown out.
He will be okay, but it will take time. It will take money.
Yep.
Let's bring into our conversation MS Now senior investigative correspondent Carol Leonnig and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst Michael Feinberg. He is a former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI.
Well, let's first start with James Comey, okay? I think that retribution does not require universal agreement. I think retribution just requires a little bit of acceptance from a few people. My concern about the normalization of this is that there are some people out there in this country that believe James Comey got what was coming to him. And those people are going to justify these actions today. And if it's okay for James Comey, then it's okay for a congressperson so-and-so. Then it's okay for journalist X, Y, and Z. Then it's okay for regular citizen Z. This is a very slippery slope.
Yeah, and I'm oftentimes very skeptical of slippery slope arguments, except what we've seen in the barely year and a half that this administration has been in power is that they're not going to stop. And it doesn't matter how many times they fail. It doesn't matter how many indictments they don't get. It doesn't matter how many trials they lose. It doesn't matter how many complaints get thrown out. They're not interested in the service of justice. They are interested in appeasing an audience of one who sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Simone referenced, Carol, the sort of timing as it relates to what happened this weekend at the White House Correspondents' Center. I also think there's the timing of Todd Blanche's audition to be Attorney General. And there was some reporting in the Times from Friday that I think is especially interesting in this moment. From that reporting, in a previously unreported incident, Mr. Blanche cautioned senior administration officials against immediately ordering the arrest of Mr. Comey after he posted a formation of seashells that Trump supporters claimed was an incitement of violence against the president, urging them to allow an investigation of the episode to proceed, according to two people familiar with the situation. And he's gotten blowback from MAGA for the fact that he was seen in that moment as not being sufficiently loyal. How much of this is Todd Blanche proving he can be the AG that Donald Trump wants?
Well, how convenient for me that you would ask that question, because I was on the phone with some sources who said that Blanche has been telling many of his senior aides inside the Department of Justice that he is not happy with having been blamed as not creating a perp walk for James Comey the last time around, and is not going to make that mistake again this time. You mentioned audition, Alicia, and I couldn't agree more. I'm not an opinion person. I'm a flat-up reporter. But the people inside the administration who are still trying to keep the deck swabbed and not violate the law every other day have told me that this particular pursuit, along with the arrest for FOIA obfuscation of a Fauci aide, plus the Department of Justice and Todd Blanche's backing of the grand ballroom on national security grounds, as the president wants, everything is part, in their view, of a hardcore overdrive audition, a desire by Todd Blanche to quickly ensure that he's no longer acting and that he doesn't make the mistake of irritating the audience of one in the way that Bondi did. Now, Bondi's failure, she tried to prosecute gobsmacking number of people for whom career prosecutors found little to zero evidence of crimes. No predication, no reason to go forward. But she didn't push as hard when prosecutors said no. She didn't replace them as quickly as Donald Trump would have liked, and she didn't force them to redo it as we're redoing it now with James Comey about an Instagram posting of some shells.
So let's talk about the Instagram posting of some shells, because
giving home goods.
Yes, or Pier 1. Throwback.
Yes. Folks, if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out right now, because y'all being played for stupid yet again. If you're buying any of this, that's why I'm going to make this point, and I'm walking past this. I'm not going to talk about this anymore because this is dumb. This is the epitome of dumb. So let's understand what we're talking about when we're talking about this whole thing about, I had to look it up because to 86 someone is slang. Y'all know what slang is, right? For rejecting or ejecting or removing someone, a term commonly used, guess where? For those of you who've been in bars and restaurants who acted a little disorderly, you know where, right? So this is what he happened upon. Walking the beach, sees these seashells arranged this way, probably got a nice chuckle out of it with his wife, took a photo of it and posted it. Now, tell me, Todd Blanche and Kash Patel, where's the sinister act here? Where's the intent, the mens rea? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Attorney General. That is the mindset, the mind in your head thinking you want to do harm to the president. So help me, Michael, understand why I get the politics and all this stuff, how this thing is going to go forward. What attorney is going to stand in front of a judge and go, well, you know, Your Honor, you know, Mr. Comey had the intent to assassinate the president of the United States, had the intent to bring harm to him. And the judge is going to look at him and go, okay, show me where that is. And he's going to produce this picture.
Yeah. Before you answer, can I play this for you? Because this is the attorney. Ellis Boyle on count one. Take a listen.
Go ahead. Thanks, Simone.
Count one, he knowingly and willfully made a threat to kill and to inflict bodily harm upon the President of the United States in violation of 18 U.S.C. 871A.
And can I also add to that real quick, since we're talking about 86, and y'all recall Matt Gaetz's post on X? Quote, we've now 86'd McCarthy, Ronna McDaniel, Senator McConnell. Better days are ahead for the Republican Party. That he posted in response to McConnell stepping down as the Senate GOP leader. So I'm ready for this administration to go after Matt Gaetz for threatening the life of Kevin McCarthy, Ronna McDaniel, and Senator McConnell. That ish ain't happening.
Well,
we know that.
If you're waiting for the administration to do that, I would highly suggest you pack a lunch, especially given that when there were people who were willing to kill congressmen and senators and to supposedly hang the vice president for not following Donald Trump's wishes, they were rewarded with pardons and commutations. So let's not pretend that any of this is actually about protecting the lives of public servants, elected or not. This is about instilling fear in the president's opponents.